All right. I I don't know what we're going to talk about. So you seem to know what we're going to talk about.
It's a good thing one of us knows what we're going to talk about for the
So
next, I don't know, 18 minutes.
so Hazeman, what are we going to talk about?
We're going to talk about why software never works the way it's supposed to.
For Hello, everybody. I'm Sparks.
I'm Hazeman.
And today we are the Space Pencils, and we're going to investigate an important topic that is going to be useful for somebody somewhere. The question that we're answering today is what, Hazeman?
The question we're answering today is, why does software never work the way it's supposed to?
Yeah. Why doesn't it ever work the way it's supposed to? What is the perception of how it's supposed to? Where does that come from?
Well, let's maybe make a comparison here.
Okay.
You've driven a car, I assume.
Yeah, once or twice.
Right. So let's say, and before the show, we were dealing with some, we were dealing with a situation with your computer. Let's say,
That's right, we were.
let's just imagine a world in which your car works the way your computer works. And so you get up in the morning, you go to work, you put the key in the ignition, you turn the ignition on, and the car turns on for 5 seconds and then turns off. How long would you keep that car?
I would sell that car immediately. This is a famous comparison that you're making, because I think this was once made before.
Right. And I think the other comparison I love is, if you built a bridge the way that you built software, we'd all be dead. Everybody would be dead. Right. So I think the perception is that there's just a lot of problems with software, and I think, as even someone who writes software, I would love to talk about why that happens. And I think there's a lot of other interesting pieces that sort of go into that. And given the last time we talked a little bit about testing. I think maybe we could sort of reverse the order of them and talk about why problems happen and what they look like, so that then people can go back to the last episode and listen to us rant about testing for a while.
Okay. So can I, in terms of like point counterpoint, can I take a perspective here? Can we go back and forth? Here's the perspective I'd like to take and try to defend, and I'm not sure if I could do it.
I will, whatever that perspective is, I will argue with you wholeheartedly.
Okay. I want to take the perspective that software actually does work exactly how it's supposed to.
I hate you right now because that's the one I want to. All right.
You want to take?
All right, I'll go. No. I got it. Let's go. You take it's working exactly as designed, and I'll see what I can do.
Okay. Let me take the first part of this. So when you look at let's take a marvelous piece of engineering, one of probably the greatest pieces of engineering in terms of like forward thinking and how well it was built. The Brooklyn Bridge. The Brooklyn Bridge is an amazing example of something that was built in a time to adhere to certain specifications that was later able to be modified without crazy changes or a complete breakdown of the entire bridge, to then accommodate large amounts of weight with cars. Like, it wasn't built in the time of cars and trains and stuff like that. So it's amazing that thing exists.
It was built in the time of trolleys and horse carriages.
Right. And so at the time, it was built to have trolleys and horse carriages be on it. And so I think software, oftentimes what happens is that our requirements for software are not to build it to last, to hold, to not have maintenance. I think most of the time we're saying in software, okay, I can either make it really good or I can get it out the door before my competitor does. Or I can make it really good in this one way where it won't break, but I don't have that many resources or that time. And so I feel like we're just not allowing software engineering groups to actually ever have a goal of making something that should work the way that you think it's supposed to.
Right. No, I hear what you're saying, right? Which is what you're articulating is there are trade-offs, and constantly people are choosing speed over stability.
Yes.
Right. They want to get it out the door quickly, and they're willing to sacrifice some stability. And I'm curious what you think is how did that become acceptable, right? Like if I turn the key on my car and it doesn't start, that's not acceptable, and I'm not going to buy that car ever again. And yet, if I fire up a random mobile app on my phone to order dinner or to, I don't know, buy a train ticket, and it just doesn't work, I go, cool, and I close it and I open it up again and I try again, and that's okay.
Let's go with the Brooklyn Bridge and actually think about how you would build that today with that standard. So here's what I think you would build. I think you would not build a plan and build a bridge and finish the bridge. I think what you would do is you would first you would run a bunch of log woods over half the lane of the Brooklyn Bridge, and you'd be like, all right, we're going to carry people over the Brooklyn Bridge so that we can get people between these two places for now. Promise you concrete is coming soon. And then as people were going back, you would be able to access the 2 points from left to right on that bridge in a very haphazard way. People would fall, they would die, the horses would have to be, put in, and so you'd start to slowly iterate and add on different parts of the bridge.
Got it. So you'd say, okay, I want to build a bridge. I would say to you, you want to build a bridge, and you would say back to me, let's start with a ferry. Yeah. Let's do a ferry first.
Yeah.
If there's a lot of traffic, cool, we'll upgrade to more ferries.
Right.
Going back and forth, and then eventually we'll do a floating pontoon thingy.
Right.
That maybe murders half the people that try to go over it.
That's
right.
And
so we'd sort of work in the thing that you're describing, we'd sort of work our way up to a bridge.
Right.
Sort of testing it with the customers as you go.
About is actually probably how it did happen, which is there was a lot of traffic that needed to get there, and it was already happening, and so they're whoa, we need a bridge. What I'm saying is if you were to actually build the bridge that way, you'd start by having wooden planks that were unsafe that people would traverse. People would be like, hey, you want to take the ferry over there? It's no, you know what? I'm going to take this new wooden plank. Have you seen this thing? It's doesn't look very safe. It's yeah, but it beats a ferry with the speed. Am I right? I feel that's how it would start. And then eventually people would be like, I heard they're putting guardrails on that wooden plank. Really?
But that's
crazy.
Okay, so let me just sort of let me counterpoint you here.
Okay.
That's not how bridges are built. That's not how it actually works.
But that's how software is built.
Why is software built that way? Why?
You know what? Here's the other part of it. That's not how all software is built. Right?
Go on.
So, my father used to be in telecommunications, where there was a lot of stuff with switches and routing with Bell Labs, AT&T back in the day, and a lot of equipment for hospitals and places in the 80s and 90s. That stuff was actually manufactured by NEC. They were these hardware units that had to be built to a certain standard, and they were built very well. And later, when my father put a PBX system in our house growing up. Later, when I would start to unwind,
wait, back up. PDX. What's a PDX system?
PBX system is if you go into a hospital and they have all the physical phones everywhere, right? Those systems are wired, and they call it a PBX system. It's how they route a couple phone lines,
calls,
to many different phones in the place. So we had one of these.
Okay, so it's how you connect phone calls.
Yeah, and
through a system.
And so our house, when we sold it, but when we sold it, the phone stuff still was fine. And it was a huge hardware unit in the closet that was running this thing. A total overkill for the house. It was just because my dad took his work home with him. But can you think of cell phones from even 5 years ago, 4 years ago, withstanding that kind of I don't know, time? Software used to be actually built to last, because the projects that were built with software were very large infrastructure projects. That's the only thing that wasn't.
So I will agree with you, except for, and I will say one brand, and you will agree with me, and we'll laugh about it, and then we'll go on.
We'll laugh nervously and then change the subject. Got it.
Nokia.
I don't know what
the Nokia candy bar phones. The Nokia candy bar phones you could put in a blender. They would survive a nuclear holocaust, and you would still call the only other Nokia phones that were left alive on the planet.
I agree. I agree with you, actually, and it's because Nokia is part of that transition mobile software, right, or mobile hardware software, right, where they weren't quite in a place yet where they were allowing third-party groups to work on software. It's it was all in-house. It was hardware engineers, firmware engineers who were building just one layer above that. things
Hair
were
dryers.
built
They
to
were
last.
building hair dryers.
They were.
But
It's,
here's
that's
the
ironic
question,
that they're
right?
called the brick, right? They're called the brick.
Right. No, the brick. I think, but here's the interesting part, right? Do you think software is getting less stable over time? Like, is it getting more buggy as we move into the future?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Why?
I think it's getting more buggy because there are more people who are forced to write it that are not from a era of domain expertise. And what I mean by
Are
that
you
is
sure?
like the tools are getting more and more. They're getting easier and easier to take incredible abstraction to the point where like for instance, if you're a software engineer, you don't need to know material
You're gonna
science.
explain. You're gonna explain abstraction, right?
No, I'm not going to explain abstraction, but I will explain a little bit. It's just when you're a software engineer, you are not a material science engineer. So
Sure.
you're writing software, but you're not having to understand how chemistry works to make chips. In fact, you know
Yes.
very little
Okay,
about
so-
how chips work, right?
To use my early analogy, right? I don't need to know how to fix my car in order to drive it.
Well, actually, no, okay. You know, it's a perfect example. People always teach people how to drive clutch so bad. Everybody wants to explain to you how a clutch works, and I will tell you how you need to teach driving a stick. If you not that people will be driving sticks a lot. in the
No,
future.
no. Please,
hold on,
please don't explain that right now.
No, but what you need to do in order to drive a stick is you need to know how it feels. It's actually much more like trying to teach someone to dance or teach somebody how to kiss or
Right. So
something.
if
It's
I
a
if
different
I
thing.
explain to you how to drive a clutch, you're useless. But if I let you do it, and then I replace my clutch, you'll be fine.
That's right. You don't need to know how a clutch works in order to drive stick. You just don't.
Correct.
Everybody wants to tell you how it
So
works.
that's-
But I don't know why. But
That's
like, it's not
that's
important.
abstraction,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Is like you don't have to have all the information in order to be able to operate the machinery of whatever it is you want to operate, and that
Yes.
you can do different levels of complexity there, right? Cars are simple. But right, I write mobile phone software. If you handed me a bunch of capacitors, there's no universe in which I could put a mobile phone together.
There's probably one. I think scientifically.
I mean, that
There's
universe
one
would
universe.
require me to have some kind of time machine in which I had to learn how the capacitor works, right? But
Right.
we stand on as software engineers, we stand on the shoulders of giants, right?
Right.
There's so much going on the devices that we use and we write software for. We have no idea.
Right. So again, well, let's go back to our point counterpoint kind of thing. I
Sure.
think that we're writing buggy software because people have put up with it. I think
Why? Why?
I think because there might be a disconnect a little bit over what the numbers say. I think a lot of people don't like if you actually look at people in mass and you look at things that are business, like when you piss people off, sometimes that can be catastrophic, but oftentimes like people will come back if you're still selling them the thing that they want or need. And so the fact that you were down or the fact that you couldn't do it that moment, people are annoyed, but it's not enough to actually make them choose a different product, oftentimes because there isn't one. That's another part of it all.
I actually no. I will say I think you're onto something here, which is I think the recovery is more important than the crash.
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
So if
absolutely.
there's
yeah.
I'll give you an example,
That's an
right?
interesting
And
point.
and in a non-technical context at all, right? I go to a hotel, my hotel room isn't ready. They say,
This is
"Sir, I'm
brilliant.
so
I see where
sorry.
you're going. Yeah, keep
I'm
going.
so sorry. Your room isn't ready, but we've upgraded you to a suite because the room that you wanted isn't available." I have a better. My room wasn't ready, but now I have a better experience having gone to this hotel, right? So I think, to some extent and I think this is why in software you see when there's a crash, they say, "Hey, would you like to report some information about the crash? We'd love to help you fix it." And I think part of that is actually genuinely the companies are trying to gather that information, but also genuinely trying to communicate that like, "Hey, that wasn't great. We want to do better. Help us do better."
Yeah. Yeah, and
So
also, like it's very.
Yeah.
I love the hotel analogy. I think it's also to understand like how hard it is to also empathize with what something will finally do with how many steps there are. Like that's really hard. Like you make something and in your head you're like, this is going to be great. It's going to go like this. It's going to be perfect. This is how it's going to behave. This is why someone's going to do it. And then what happens is the software goes out And if the software is something that is publicly facing, where somebody's interacting with a UI or a service or anything like that, customers start to do really dumb stuff. Like, and I'm one of them. Like, I've used software where like I'm like, I don't understand. This should do. Okay. Like, it's really actually hard to gauge how people will use software that you've just invented. You know what I mean?
I'll expose a little bit of my background and say I learned something truly magical from a guy named David Karp who started the company Tumblr. And he said when I was interviewing with him for a job, he said, one of the best parts about working here is you write a piece of software with a very deliberate, here's how it's going to work and here's how people are going to use it. And then you release it to the world and they do nothing that you wanted them to do.
Right.
They completely ignore your instructions, but they actually genuinely make it a tool that works for them. And being able to participate in that process is kind of, he reflected that it was magical. And that's a lesson I'll never forget, which is, you can put your software out into the world, but you have no control over it. It's going to be used in a million different ways you never anticipated. And maybe that's part of why software is so buggy as opposed to things like cars and bridges, which is like you're going from point A to point B with a car.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
and
you're
and
right,
if you open
you know the intent of a bridge. It's what the bridge is supposed to do.
It's a very fast ferry. A bridge is a very fast ferry.
Yeah, it's a very fast ferry. But also like when you're building a bridge, like the things that a bridge might be used for instead. Perfect example, the Brooklyn Bridge. You know what it's also used for? It's used for
subways
lovers to put little locks on, to put a memory on that bridge.
Right. Oh, this is great.
And so did they set out to say, okay, so what we're going to build is this thing that allows horses and buggies to go across and people to lock locks on it so that they can remember their loved ones? Like, that's not what happened.
No.
But I think often in software, what you're doing is you're like, I don't know, like, I think I want to do something between these two places. I'm getting a lot of feedback that something about locks should happen. Maybe let's just string some cables between these two places. I don't know. Let's see where this goes. You know what I mean?
So I think what you're saying is genuinely when it comes to software versus bridges, the stakes are lower when it comes to software.
The stakes are lower.
So if I can't buy a train ticket with the software, I can still walk up to a kiosk or I can walk up to the conductor and give them cash and get where I need to go. And so I think to some extent, and what I've been trying to get to with some of the questions here is there's a certain baseline of expectation, right? I baseline on it should work most of the time, as opposed to my car, when I turn the key, it should work 100% of the time.
Well, on that note, like the other part is, the Brooklyn Bridge is also a poor example because before the Brooklyn Bridge was built, people built bridges. You know what I mean? Like,
no way.
Like,
no way.
Like what's one of the interesting and exciting things about tech is that for engineers, product people, entrepreneurs, children alike, is that it's new. I mean, we're trying to do stuff where a lot of times when I hear really intelligent people that I know who have run good product talk, they usually talk from more of a design or user experience standpoint where they're like, well, okay, like what I want to do is like, I want this group of people to like connect with this group of people because they're seeing something that's important there. And like, it's very new. It's not like, it would be like being back in the day where it's like two people who are like, we have to keep crossing that ugly, muddy river every day. And it'd be like, yeah, could we do something there? It's like, yeah, do you want to like pour some sand in that part? And they do that, and then it floats down river, and then it's like,
right. Well, that didn't work.
Let me try to dam up some of the, and like eventually they came to a bridge, and then they're like, bridge. Same thing with sailing. You don't see a lot of innovations in how to sail. You see innovations like what sailing materials are made out of, but it's like we figured it out. You have the thing, the wind blows, steers it in the water. Pretty straightforward. Okay. Software.
I'll say something. I'll say something slightly derivative here, and maybe this will get us on a tangent, but I would say the reason sailing hasn't innovated is because the world passed sailing by. And I would say the same thing about horseback riding. Horseback riding hasn't evolved at all because we have cars.
We have cars.
Sailing is sailing because we fly in airplanes. We don't have to get from point A to point B using the wind.
Right.
We just fly through the sky.
Right.
And then at a certain point when we invent teleportation or we go through super vacuum tunnels under the ocean.
Right.
Airplanes will be like, oh, airplanes are fun. They're not a way that we get around anywhere.
Right,
anymore.
right. There'll be a novelty. There'll be a novel. And
Right.
Software
In the way
will even
that-
be that way, right? Where you'll be
Oh.
looking at. Yeah, it will. It will.
Well, I live for a day where software is a novelty.
Like, what are you doing? Oh, I'm just gonna open up my code editor. Well, don't you know you just think that, and some AI makes the product that you want? Yeah, but I just wanted to do it the old timey way. You know, they used to type into a computer to make this stuff.
Are you talking about driving a stick shift right now?
Okay, so going back to our question, why? You had the better framing for it.
Why does software never work the way that it's supposed to? I have a slightly philosophical way to tie all this up.
Okay, let's
If you'll permit me, I think
I will permit it.
so. There's a lot of software is very tied up into innovation, and innovation comes a lot from science. And what's ironic about science is people are looking for stability when they think about science. They want what's true today to be true tomorrow. And what's extremely paradoxical about science is the more scientists that you have working on a problem, the less likely tomorrow is going to look like today. Which is to say, they are going to figure out something that is fundamentally different from the way yesterday looked. Right? So if you think about quantum theory, if you think about right, so if you look back, from Newton to now, for example, the speed at which scientific theory replaces itself is accelerating. So the more people that you have doing science, the less likely your scientific theory, the shorter the longevity of your scientific theory.
Right. Right. No,
And so I'd
I
argue
agree with that.
And so I'd argue that there's a corollary in software, which is the faster you innovate with software, the less likely it is going to work as intended. The
I
more
would agree
people that
with
you
that.
have innovating within software,
Yes.
the more unstable it will be. And so if you look back to
Well,
the
if
early
you look back
IBM
at,
mainframes,
like information technology as a concept is, which we don't use that phrase as much anymore. It's kind of gauche, but like
sure.
information technology, if you really think about the unlocking power of it, it like is absolutely like a feedback loop, right? Like, what do? Well, we're going to work on technology about information. Really? How are you? You're going to have to figure that out. Yeah, but then we're going to use the tools that helped us figure that out to figure it out even harder. And it's like, whoa, mind blow, right? You're getting this
Right.
like, huge acceleration because you're actually like dealing with like not thought itself, but something very similar when you're dealing with
Dealing with
technology that deals
ideas,
with information and
concepts.
ideas. Yeah.
Right. And when we write software, the dirty secret is we're basically just doing formal logic all day, every day, and we're doing it on a performance curve.
Right.
But we're thinking for a living. Software engineers are thinking for a living, and so the more software engineers you have in the world, the faster your software will move, and the less reliable it will be, unless there is a severe, and we can talk about this in another episode, unless there's a severe economic back pressure against that instability. So things like
Right.
medical devices or and I would argue that that's why
Infrastructure.
bridges are much more stable.
Or like network switching, right? There's something very different
Right.
about like, Cisco network routers versus Cisco video stuff, right? Like those, the backbone of the internet is more important, one would argue, than your phone call that you needed to have that day because, it's
Correct.
It's foundational. And you do see that type of software have less bugs. Anyway, Hazen, I feel like we've come to a conclusion. Do we agree that I mean, I feel like I took a point and you kind of were I don't know. Are we on the song?
We sort of explored it together. So I would sum up our journey thus far with the following points. 1, the faster and more innovative software that you want to be engaged with, the less stable it will be. The more people who are thinking about new things, the less it's going to do things that are exactly as intended. And that trend will continue into instability until there's some severe or at least countervailing economic back pressure against it. Okay. So, if you want more stable software, pay for software that's more stable.
Okay. And I would say because of the instability of the fact that that's probably not going to happen anytime soon in a number of different areas, we're here as the Space Pencils to help you out maneuvering this whole software thing. Anyway, I'm Sparks.
I'm Hazeman.
Bye.
Good night.